Hey guys, how's it going? It's Al. I've got a Draftkings Week 11 first look lineup for you. We're going to go through every position. I'm going to talk about a few of the players. We're going to try and piece together a first look lineup. I've done no research for this slate yet. There are no projections out. This is just me looking at what I've got there, taking a look at the Vegas lines, and seeing what we can come up with. If we can piece together, cobble together a pretty solid, what I like to call a dummy lineup, a placeholder lineup, something that we could just plug in and enter our head-to-head games in case, you know, all electricity is gone. We have a working lineup theoretically that we could play while our opponents all get zeros because they just accepted the game and didn't put in a lineup. So this is why I do these. I think that it's a fun exercise to do every single Monday, and you guys have seemed to like them over the past couple of years, so I continue to do them. If you're new to the channel, thank you for clicking on that thumbnail. I think it's a pretty nice looking thumbnail. Pin Monkey, thank you for that one. If you do me a favor and drop a like on the video, let's see if we can get to 1,000 likes on this video before kickoff this weekend. Subscribe to the channel and be sure that you ring that notifications bell because I put out an awful lot of content between NBA and NFL, how to win on DraftKings videos that you can find in a playlist as well. Go check all that out, and I don't want you to miss any of it, so make sure that you got that notifications bell rung so that you get that ping on your phone or your email inbox or on your YouTube inbox, your front page, as soon as I publish new content. Let's get right to this video. Let's get right to the salaries, and let's look at what we got this week. So there's some players that have been priced up. As I said, there's 11 games on this slate. There's some that are really good and some that are kind of trash. We got a bunch of games that are totals of 46 plus, and we got a few games that are under 40 for the expected points scored in those games. We kind of want to try and stick to the high totaled games unless we find spots where there are some teams that have underpriced players that we can maybe take advantage of. Lamar Jackson's been an absolute revelation, and after his 33.42 points last week, based on a tweet by Graham Barfield, is now on pace to break the single season fantasy scoring record that Patrick Mahomes set last year that previously had stood for about a decade till Danian Tomlinson for the most fantasy points scored in an entire season. He's squared up against Houston. He is now priced up again to 7,700 based on the rushing floor that he has. And mind you, he did bust a 47-yard run for a touchdown last week that really bolstered his stats against Cincinnati, but Cincinnati's so bad against the run that there's somebody that we want to attack pretty much every single week of the season with usually running backs, but Lamar Jackson has got the most rushing attempts of anybody on Baltimore for the last bunch of weeks. I think that he makes a great tournament quarterback this week. I'm going to want to stuff volume at running back, which is going to preclude me from having him in my cash game lineup. I typically pay down at quarterback in cash. Drew Brees has the best matchup that we can get, which is basically playing against Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay gives up some of the most points per game on DraftKings to opposing quarterbacks, the most points to opposing wide receivers, the second most points to opposing tight ends, and pass catching backs have done well against them. Though they do a great job of being a reverse funnel and stopping you from running the ball, that's not really here nor there based on how good a pass catcher Alvin Kamara is. Michael Thomas is an absolute stud and posting a year that is again for the record books where he could set the all-time receptions record in a season. Drew Brees is back, did not have a good game against Atlanta, but the other players around him did very well. I'm expecting a bounce back in this situation on the road in Tampa. Their defense not geared to be able to stop the pass, and Drew Brees is good at passing the football. And we may see some of that reflected in the rest of this lineup, but I'm not going to use him in my cash game lineup. Deshaun Watson against Baltimore. Baltimore's defense has really stepped up recently. They've gotten a little bit more healthy. Deshaun Watson, though, not somebody that I really think that you can project to stop on a week-to-week basis. He finds ways to score. Good tournament play this week because I expect him to be less owned than somebody like Drew Brees at the same price point, somebody like Dak Prescott at the same price point. So if you're looking to leverage the field a little bit at quarterback, you can do that with Deshaun Watson. Garoppolo against Arizona, they've given up a ton of points to opposing quarterbacks, 31.88 for Jimmy the last time that they squared off a couple of weeks ago against Arizona in Arizona. Now they get them at home. Going to be a very popular play, and rightfully so. We don't know his results from week 10 as he plays on Monday night, and that happens after I tape this game. Josh Allen bounces right back up to 6,600 because of his matchup against Miami. Had his highest scoring game of the week last week with 25 DraftKings points. He's sitting up here where he needs to have 25 DraftKings points, at least as far as I'm concerned. I need 23 plus from him. He's only done that one time this year. Although against Miami, we know how bad defensively they have been, but the last couple of weeks they've been playing better. A little bit more heart being shown from them. They're really kind of taking it personally at this point. At least it seems so. And Josh Allen, we haven't seen the ceiling from him yet this year. We really haven't. And last week he did have the 2 rushing touchdowns, which is great, but he has not been running the ball as much as he did second half of last season when he was the QB1 for a 5 or 6 week stretch. And he is not connected deep with his wide receivers, something else that he was taking so many shots at last year, throwing the ball downfield. And adding a player like John Brown to this roster, we thought that there would be a lot of connections deep with John Brown, and that just hasn't materialized either. Only 10 touchdowns through 10 weeks of the NFL season. He's been doing a little bit with his legs for us, but we haven't seen that ceiling game. Nothing over 25.4 points. That happened in week 10. Maybe he's going to pick it up down the stretch. Maybe the weather change is something that Josh Allen needs to be successful as they get more rain games, get more snow games, get more wind games, things that are going to affect other teams. In this game in Miami, obviously Miami not going to be a wind or a snow game, but could be a spot based on that defense and how much they've given up where Josh Allen could be there. I think he's a good tournament play this week. I typically like to pay a little bit further down at quarterback. So looking at the players that are down here in the 6K and down range, Matthew Stafford missed week 10 with an injury. If he's back, he is somebody that we can lean on if we believe that he is healthy enough to play. As long as there's no structural damage there, he's considered week to week and day to day right now. We'll get news on this as the week goes on. It's 6K. We have to be sure that he's healthy and is going to start and hopefully finish the game. In order to play him, I think we can find somebody that's a little bit cheaper. Nick Foles makes his return in an extremely slow paced, extremely low totaled game. Wait and see for me on Nick Foles coming out of the bye week here and coming off of injury. Carson Wentz against a really tough defense. Very, very contrarian play here if you're willing to make that play. But for me, Kyle Allen at 5,300 has looked good enough. If we can get 20 points out of Kyle Allen, if we can get 17 to 20 points out of Kyle Allen and 3x to 4x this salary, it's more than enough to satisfy based on the running backs that we're going to want to plow into this lineup. This game has a total of about 50 points and Carolina favored by 6. Yes, there is always the threat that Christian McCaffrey runs a couple in, but Atlanta has been pretty good against running backs, and the way that you've beaten them this year is through the air. If Kyle Allen ends this game with 2 passing touchdowns, and that could be a thing with Christian McCaffrey as good in the passing game as he is, and the emergence of DJ Moore, and Curtis Samuel's been an absolute stud, and you've got somebody like Greg Olsen running routes on 90+% of Kyle Allen's dropbacks, and we're getting a good amount of dropbacks from Kyle Allen on a week-to-week basis. We've only seen the one game where he topped 20 points, and it was 25 in his first start against Arizona. No shock there, as bad as Arizona's been against opposing quarterbacks. But if we get 18 to 21 points out of Kyle Allen for 5,300, more than enough for me to be satisfied this early in the week. Taking a look at running backs, we have some great running back matchups. Obviously, Atlanta is tougher against the running back position than they have been previously. Christian McCaffrey has not been priced up yet. I don't have the exact number in total, but before week 10, if you exclude the 2 games against Tampa Bay, Christian McCaffrey was averaging over 36 DraftKings points per game, and that's absolutely absurd. He underperformed that in week 10 with only 29 points, but could have had 35 if he had just reached over his head as the bell rung, as the clock struck 0 to get him to 35 on the year, so he would have been right there. McCaffrey is an absolute monster. I think there are many paths to fit him into your lineups this week, and I do not recommend fading him. But for the purposes of this first look lineup, I don't have all the value on the slate. We don't have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday practice reports, and we don't have the guys right now who appear as value plays later in the week. 2 weeks ago, we had Jalen Samuels pop at 4,000 on DraftKings. This last week, we had LaShawn McCoy sit, and Damian Williams became a value play just on Sunday morning, an X factor that we talked about on the Anti-Tinkercast on Twitch. There's a link down below if you want to follow on Twitch and catch my live streams, which happen 6 days a week during NFL season, where we go over all the plays for a couple hours every single day and just talk football constantly, as well as some other banter. But for the sake of this first look lineup, I am not going to play Christian McCaffrey, although I can fit him with the other lineup or with the other guys that I want for this lineup. But for $1,500 cheaper, I can get Ezekiel Elliott playing against the worst defense that you could possibly find to oppose running backs in the Detroit Lions. They have allowed the most fantasy points per game on DraftKings to opposing running backs, and I get a $1,500 savings to come down to Ezekiel Elliott at $9K. Did he have a good game against Minnesota in Week 10? No. He did have 22 touches, but it was against Minnesota. Minnesota has allowed the 5th least DraftKings points to opposing running backs. They're an extremely stout defense that is geared to stop opposing running backs, and Detroit simply is not. Dallas is very, very, very inclined to just feed the ball to Zeke often and early and late and at the goal line. 22 touches in Week 10, 23 touches in Week 9, 28 touches in Week 7, and 33 touches in Week 6. He led the league in volume last year. He won't lead it in volume this year based on the holdout early in the year and the way that they kind of rolled him in easily, just eased him into the lineup. But the savings from CMC to Zeke are very, very real. And I think that you could play Team Jam him in and play both Zeke and McCaffrey in a lineup, but we're going to need a little bit more value to pop for that to happen. And I want to pay for a premium wide receiver, and I think that we can get there. So I'm going to have to find a little bit cheaper play to go with. Dalvin Cook going against Denver. This is one of those slowdown games. Dalvin Cook has been tremendous based on volume. And matchup really has not mattered all that much to him. We've seen like a 13, 15 point floor. He is a good pivot for me off of Ezekiel Elliott if you want to get the lower owned guy in a little bit tougher matchup. Fournette has been another guy who's been getting tremendous volume all season long and increased usage, massive increased usage in the passing game, but another slowdown game on the road in Indy. He will get fed the ball. He will get his touches. But I think there's a better way that we can go. Alvin Kamara squaring off against Tampa Bay. We typically don't play running backs against Tampa Bay, but he's not a running back or just a running back. He's not a pound between the tackles guy. He's a big play guy. He is a pass catching running back, somebody that we can employ in a very narrow target tree for the New Orleans Saints at 7,400. And wait until you see the price on Mike Thomas this week. He's been priced way up to 9,900. Alvin Kamara, I believe, gets between 6 and 10 targets this week against a defense that gives up a ton of points. This game could very easily shoot out as it's one of the highest expected totals on the week in terms of over-unders. And Kamara can get you there even with only 4 carries against Atlanta, had 15 DraftKings points, did not score a touchdown as they only had 9 on the day. I'm expecting a more of a 25 to 30 point output from the Saints offense this week, more touchdowns to go around. Will he be efficient on the ground against this Tampa Bay defense? I don't think so, but I think he's definitely in the mix at 7,400 with the amount of targets he should get. But the best play to me in this mid-range is right here with Josh Jacobs, somebody else who has seen tremendous volume from a team that most people thought was not going to be as good, but they've been a very good offense even without Antonio Brown, and Josh Jacobs has been right there at the core of it the entire season long, getting usage inside the 5-yard line, getting usage inside the 20. Once they get into the red zone, 90 yards per game on the ground, and squaring off against Cincinnati, who has just given it up to opposing running backs every single week. We have certain teams that we stream certain positions against every week this season. Tight ends against Arizona and Tampa Bay, wide receivers against Oakland, wide receivers against Tampa Bay, quarterbacks against Arizona, quarterbacks against Tampa. Certain teams we just want to play the guy that's playing on the other side of the ball. And while that price for Josh Jacobs has bounced up from 5,700 to 6,900 based on this matchup, and it did come up again against Detroit, the other team that we want to stream running backs against, it's just not high enough to ignore. And I think that we have the value already on this slate to be able to play him. So you give me Ezekiel Elliott and Josh Jacobs with the combined probably 50 touches or more that I'm going to see out of the two of them, more than enough. I need to find some value now. Let's plug in our 3K defense. I don't care who it is. Coming down at running back, I want to find a third running back. And at 4,800, again, Carolina has been the team that's given up the most DraftKings points to opposing running backs over the last 4 weeks. And Brian Hill, coming off of a 21 touch performance because of the injury to Devonta Freeman, who is sitting into an MRI this week, right as we are recording this. If he sits, and there is a chance that he sits in this game, Brian Hill becomes a great value play at 4,800. It may expire Freeman plays, Brian Hill's not the value play. If Freeman sits, he is. But for right now, he looks like the best value play on the board to me, and I'm going to plug him in at 4,800 for this week. Moving on to wide receiver. I told you Mike Thomas was expensive. 9,900 for a wide receiver is a price that I don't think we've seen since the beginning of 2016 for a wide receiver on DraftKings. The beginning of that year, guys like Julio Jones and Antonio Brown were about 9,000 to 9,900, and running backs were priced way down. Now we've got wide receivers being priced up and running backs being priced up based on matchup. And this matchup with Tampa Bay has been where we have streamed wide receivers all season long. I still think we can realistically expect 10 to 14 targets for Michael Thomas. I think that he is a GPP only play, though, at his price of 9,900, because there are other plays in equally tasty matchups that we can go attack at 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 cheaper, not to mention the value guys that sit between 5,000 or 6,000 and 4,000 on an every week basis. Hopkins is the second highest priced wide receiver, and he is only 8,100. He has seen double-digit targets in the last 4 games. He has produced over 20 fantasy points in 2 of those, with 19.4 in a third. Yes, Baltimore's secondary has gotten better as they've gotten more healthy, but Jacksonville's secondary was healthy, and so was Indy's. And against 2 of those, he averaged 25 DraftKings points in those 2 games. At 8,100, it's hard to imagine that he is less of a play at 1,800 cheaper than Michael Thomas. I think Hopkins is a far better cash game play if you want to go that route. Amari Cooper, we're going to have to check based on the injury that he sustained this week at 7,700 on Sunday Night Football. We'll have to wait and see on him as the week goes on. We've streamed wide receivers against Philly for like 3 years. I don't see why it's going to stop. Again, double-digit targets in 4 straight games or more. 4 straight games with 9 in the 5th. Just a steady stream of targets on the indefensible drag route that New England runs that nobody seems to figure out how to guard. Touchdown equity here from New England's offense, as always. Matchup equity, because Philly does not have a good set of cornerbacks that can stop anything that Julian Edelman brings to the table, and his quarterback's number 1 target. Julian Edelman at 7,600 is a fine play. Julio Jones, 7,500, with the possible absence of Austin Hooper and Freeman. We could see that sort of volume that I just had for those other wide receivers that we talked about going to Julio Jones, which is all we ever want, is for Julio Jones to get 10 to 15 targets in games. Now we might start to see that, as Austin Hooper probably going to miss week 11. Freeman getting an MRI on this week already, so more volume could be headed towards Julio Jones. Mike Evans or Godwin has basically been the question that we've had to ask every single week. New Orleans could be without Lattimore. This defense has been good. If Lattimore misses this week, Mike Evans could have another possible ceiling week. It all depends on targets. If he gets these double-digit target games, he is going to bust out for a huge week, as he always does. If he has 8 or less targets, there is always the chance for him to bust at this salary. But 4 catches on 6 targets for 82 yards, 12 points this week at 7,600. Yeah, you don't want that out of him, but it's not a 4-point game. It's not a bad game that we've seen out of other things, other players. This is why we like to pay down at wide receiver, because of the variance inherent at the position. Paying up at wide receiver is risky, but I think that we can do it, especially in a game that I think has the highest shootout potential on the slate. If New Orleans gets a lead, Tampa Bay is going to be able to keep up if Lattimore is out. I'm going to plug Mike Evans into this lineup and figure it out the rest. As I said, we're going to bring that back with a tight end. Kittle is going to be, he's doubtful. He's not playing on Monday night. We don't know what his situation is for week 11 against the best matchup for tight ends at 7K. I definitely think that he's viable against Arizona. With as much volume as he gets, with as much red zone usage as he gets, he dominates this team in both of those categories with over 30% of the red zone looks and 27% of the targets on the season. If he's healthy, we're going to play him against Arizona, but we're going to have to make some other things happen. That's why I went with Mike Evans over George Kittle. And they've priced up his backup to 3,400, so no real value there. If you're going to go with Ross Dwelly in the absence, it's going to be a bit of a reach. He's probably going to be low owned unless he really breaks out on Monday night. We'll see what happens there. I mean, I can't tell you what's going to happen on Monday night and in week 11. Impossible. But based on his usage, he played 70% of the snaps in the last game that George Kittle played. And if George Kittle's out, we're expecting him to play like 85+% of the snaps. We'll see how many routes he runs on Garoppolo's dropbacks. But that matchup with Arizona is just too good to ignore. Mark Andrews, not running as many routes, had 8 targets, but only ran 16 routes against Cincinnati, had 23 DraftKings points. He's very much boomer bust right now and extremely touchdown dependent. Even though we're seeing those 8 target games, high variance play, at least as far as I can see, for Mark Andrews. Now, look, if he has 2 touchdowns, don't at me, because they certainly look his way in the red zone, but he is very touchdown dependent, more so than other voluminous players at the position. And by volume, I don't just mean volume of targets. I mean volume of routes run, volume of snaps, volume of routes per dropback. He's running a lot of routes and being targeted when he runs them, but he's not on the field all that much right now. Only running routes on 16 of the 23 dropbacks last week for Baltimore. So Zach Ertz still underpriced, but in a really tough matchup. I'm not expecting this sort of an output like he had against Chicago, but at 5K, he is certainly in play. Jared Cook, Tampa Bay is the second best matchup for opposing tight ends. And while we can't really afford Michael Thomas in this lineup, and we opted for Josh Jacobs over Alvin Kamara, Jared Cook is going to see a good amount of targets from Drew Brees against a team that can't stop anybody that can catch passes. There's really only 3 guys that they target a bunch for New Orleans, and it's Michael Thomas gets 1, Alvin Kamara gets 2. Jared Cook is the 3rd highest targeted guy on this team, especially when guys like Ted Ginn and Traquan Smith on the outside, who should eat up 2 or 3 targets between each of them. But Jared Cook could see as many targets or more as those 2 guys who get down the field combined in this one game against a team that is ill-equipped to stop him. So give me Jared Cook at 4,400, giving me 4,600 to play with 2 other wide receivers. Mentioned how John Brown has not really gotten it together. Even though I think he's having a very good year, he has not really put it together getting open for deep plays. 1 play over 30 yards on the season for John Brown. Just not what I was expecting out of him all season long, with Josh Allen at quarterback as much as he challenges down the field. AJ Green still questionable. Cortland Sutton's been great, but do we really want to play him against Minnesota? I'm probably going to opt for no. Marvin Jones Jr. against a tough Dallas cornerback defense. He's in play, but tournament only for me, because at the same price, I've got the emergence of DJ Moore, who's averaging 10 targets a game over the last 4 weeks, more targets than Julio Jones, but priced $1,600 cheaper, and playing against Atlanta's defense that has just given up yards in bunches and touchdowns in bunches to opposing wide receivers. I get the matchup with my quarterback as well, with Kyle Allen. I would not be mad at you if you wanted to go with Curtis Samuel. Less targets, possibly a higher ceiling, as he is more apt to get down the field and has a higher red zone usage this season for the Panthers than does DJ Moore. So I don't hate it if you want to make that savings of $600 to get down to Curtis Samuel. That leaves us with $3,300 left to spend and 14 targets over the last 2 weeks for $3,300. With all the other new injuries that have been sustained, the trade of Mo Sanu made him a viable play. Russell Gage, because now he steps into a spot where he's going to be playing a bunch of snaps and he's going to be getting a solid amount of usage and targets. But now they're going to be missing possibly Austin Hooper, and now they're going to be missing possibly Devonta Freeman, which means more usage has to go to these underpriced players. Is it pretty to have 2 Atlanta Falcons in a lineup? Not necessarily, but both are underpriced and can seemingly get to volume or get to value on their volume alone. And that's the type of players that I want to roster. I like the way this lineup shakes out. Kyle Allen, Ezekiel Elliott, Josh Jacobs, Mike Evans, DJ Moore, Russell Gage, Jared Cook, Brian Hill, and a 3K defense that we can change by the time the weekend gets here. That's going to do it for the video. Thank you guys for joining. Drop a like on the video. Let's see if we can get to 1,000 before the week finishes. Subscribe to the channel, ring that notifications bell. And until the next video, I'll catch up to you later. Bye.
He's a legend.